The agenda this week heard why capitalism needs a government-led overhaul and assessed Ontario's decision to invoke the notwithstanding clause over its election spending legislation. The agenda's week in review begins with CNN's Fareed Zakaria on lessons learned from a global pandemic.
Millions of people on this continent are asking themselves, can we trust the Chinese to give us the straight goods on ... fill in the blanks. How this virus started in the first place would be a good question we'd like to get the answer to. What's your answer in terms of how much we can trust the Chinese to do business with them, to get straight answers from them, to stop stealing our intellectual property, etc.?
It's a very complicated question. It is the question, and you put it in a very interesting way. How much can we trust the Chinese? I'd put it this way. China is a dictatorship. It is in the nature of dictatorships to control information. So there's very little doubt in my mind that the Chinese are being secretive, obstructionist, duplicitous even with regard to the origins of COVID, which may have been an entirely accidental leak from a lab that was working on these viruses in order to come up with vaccines and treatments. But the way this works in a dictatorship, think of Chernobyl, is any mistake has to be covered up. And transparency is the enemy of a dictatorship. So don't expect transparency, don't expect open and free flows and exchanges of information. But that said, China is not Russia. I think this is a very important distinction to make. Russia is kind of a spoiler on the world stage. If you think about the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Ukraine, this is almost unprecedented since 1945, to literally just march in and take another country's territory. If you think about what it's been doing in Syria, bankrolling really mass murder and slaughter on a scale that is breathtaking. If you think about what it is doing in the world of cybercrime, it has at the very least encouraged, if not directed, massive amounts of cybercrime and cyber theft. China is not playing that game. China is trying to rise within the world, gain influence, gain strength, the kind of traditional great power rise. And so there are areas, I think, where one could imagine cooperating with the Chinese. They have kept to their end of the bargain on a lot of things, from climate change to even in trade. There are places where they have certainly cheated, but let's be honest, there are places where the United States, Canada, the European Union also fudged the rules. China has not proved to be an outlier in those areas. It is a responsible country that makes commitments and keeps up to them. But don't expect them to behave like a liberal democracy with regard to something like information. They're not.
Let's pivot to the Middle East here now, Fareed. And to that end, I want to quote something that you wrote recently in the Washington Post, where you wrote, "It has been the same way for decades. Every time violence between the Israelis and Palestinians erupts, governments around the world urge de-escalation, a ceasefire agreement is reached, and experts warn that the situation cannot continue like this. But it has, and it will. Ultimately, this is not a problem that can be resolved through power, whether political or military. It can only be resolved through moral persuasion." I do want to ask you about the new government in Israel that was just created the other day. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of the last decade or more, 12 years, I guess, is now gone. Naftali Bennett is the new prime minister, at least for the next couple of years. Does that, in your view, open up any new possibilities for the Middle East?
Not really. I'll tell you why. Naftali Bennett, who is the new prime minister, is actually to the right of Bibi Netanyahu on the core issue you were just alluding to, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Bennett is the most significant politician in Israel, in Israeli history, to forego even the possibility of a Palestinian state, to argue forthrightly that what Israel should do is annex the West Bank, never allow a Palestinian state. He said that he has killed many Arabs during his time in the Israeli army, and he celebrates that fact. Now, this is not a man about to usher in a Palestinian state or to begin serious negotiations on that front. He has said, to be fair, that he will give up his dreams to pursue this coalition government. But you see what I mean? It's very unlikely that you're going to get more movement from him than you were from Bibi Netanyahu. Look, the reality is, and this is what I was trying to describe in that column, everybody has been trying to kind of force Israel into making concessions to the Palestinians and to scare them by saying, otherwise there'll be terrorism, otherwise the Arabs won't like you and you'll never have peace with the Arabs, otherwise you won't be able to prosper on the world stage. All those predictions have proved wrong. As a simple matter of fact, Israel has managed to build a wall, to build these extraordinary anti-rocket missile systems, and to put in place an intelligence network that is essentially have ended the problem of terrorism in Israel. Even when these rockets fall, they get intercepted. So you can see this in the numbers who die, right? For every one Israeli, 20 Palestinians die in the retaliation. They were told that you won't be able to prosper on the world stage. Israel is being courted by every country in the world for its technological prowess. And countries like India, I grew up in India. India had no relations with Israel when I was growing up. Now, out of necessity, they feel they have to. Russia has forged deep ties with Israel. Again, Russia used to be the biggest bankroller of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And now even the Arabs are normalizing relations with Israel. So ultimately, the only way this ends is if the Israelis feel like they cannot bear the cost to their conscience of ruling over 4 to 5 million people without giving them political rights.
I guess I should start by saying, Professor, you have set a modest little goal of rethinking capitalism in the hopes that countries worldwide are actually going to do government differently. And I wonder why you didn't find that mission just utterly and completely daunting to set out on.
Well, first of all, when we use the word capitalism, I think we forget that there's different ways to do capitalism. There's varieties of capitalism. And I think we have the wrong one in many countries. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic just completely woke us up to just how badly prepared we are. We weren't even able to produce pretty basic stuff like personal protection equipment, enough of it for frontline workers, at least in the first lockdown. We have a digital divide, which means that so many young people who have been locked down from school have not accessed their human right to education. We have a vaccine, but that's not enough if it's actually not globally accessible. So, in terms of how we produce, how we distribute, but also how we consume, there's huge lessons to learn. And I think, the fact that 51 years ago, we did something incredibly hard as humanity. We put a man on the moon and also brought him, at the time they were all boys, now we're getting girls on the moon, back as well. That was much harder than PPE, but it's actually easier than some of the more kind of social missions. So what I try to do in the book is to say, let's break down what actually got us to the moon in terms of how government and business interacted, how they co-invested, how there was much less ideology. You had a government that was directing the show, but lots of private sector innovation and investment before public goal. And what would it look like to apply that to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, we got to the moon in I guess the Americans got to the moon in 1970, but of course, President Kennedy set out the goal almost a decade earlier, and he wanted it done regardless of the cost because he said it was just something we had to do. Do we still think that way today?
Absolutely not. In fact, if you read the different speeches he gave in 61 and 62, the words he used were like, we're going to do it because it's hard, not because it's easy. And we might even screw up along the way. Well, he didn't say screw up, but he said we might make mistakes along the way. It's going to cost a lot of money. So that kind of welcoming of uncertainty, of experimentation, of trial and error, and also having kind of an approach to the budget, which one could call an outcomes-oriented budget, right? You focus on the goal and then you backtrack and say, how much will it cost? And that's just going to be what it costs. But especially setting it up in such an ambitious way, which required investment in innovation in so many different sectors, not just aeronautics. There was innovation in nutrition and materials, electronics, software. The entire software industry was actually a spillover in some ways of that Apollo program. But also, there was failure along the way. So the Apollo 1 tragedy, and those 3 astronauts who died, what was so interesting, well, it's tragic, but still quite interesting, that one of the astronauts, Gus Grissom, before dying on that day, said, how are we going to get to the moon when we can't even communicate between three buildings? Because he couldn't hear what was being said to him on the, on the lunar module from the mission control room. And, basically all these kind of government silos and these different kind of parts of government today, which we know don't work together. He was reflecting on that, on how badly NASA within a square kilometer was communicating between its buildings. And that caused a massive shakeup within NASA to actually, think about its own internal structure in order to be what I call mission oriented. And so today, where there's trillions being poured into the system with COVID-19 recovery funds, it's really important to remember that it's not enough to kind of have helicopter money, right? Just have a lot of public money in the system if the actual capacity on the ground within our public institutions isn't fit for purpose. And as Obama once said, the last time we reinvented government was in the era of black and white TV. So instead of just thinking government's part of the problem, or at best it's part of the solution, right? These kind of dichotomous ways of thinking about government, what does it actually mean to have an ambitious government that works hand in hand with the private sector, of course, but to fulfill serious public goals? What does it mean for organizational capacity? What does it mean for actually organizing a partnership that's truly symbiotic and not what I would call parasitic, which is what we often have in the health innovation space, where you have, billions of public funds going in, and then somehow the drugs that are produced, or at least co-produced with public money, aren't accessible to citizens, whether it's because they're overpriced or if the intellectual property rights often get abused. So, a lot of these kind of intricate questions are the ones I think we should be asking on the back of COVID-19, but also, of course, the climate crisis, which is the other massive, crisis that is on top of this current health pandemic.
I am going to follow up on those questions, but I don't want to leave NASA just yet, because there's a story in your book. It's 1962. JFK is touring NASA, and he meets a janitor. And he asked the janitor, "What's your job here?" And he said, "Well, Mr. President, I'm helping get a man on the moon." What's the significance of that story?
Well, we should be careful because on the one hand, the significance of that story is that it was a really inspirational mission. I mean, you'll remember also all those pictures of, humans all over the globe looking up, right, at the sky during, the moon landing. On the other hand, there was real tensions on Earth at the time. You'll remember there was, the whole civil rights movement. And people within the civil rights movement arguing, why are we spending billions in space when we have hunger, poverty, and racism on Earth? So it wasn't, exactly a linear process, but it surely was a period where we had much more leadership. In some ways, there was also more debate, less also the ideological debate than we have today. But one of the points I make is that even those who believe in government, forget the kind of Reaganite, Thatcherite kind of view of government, just get out of the way. Even those who believe in it continue, some of the progressive economists too, to talk about it as just, fixing market failures. And what was interesting at the time of Apollo is that it was a real example of what I've been speaking about for some time, even on your show, which is we need governments that co-create and co-shape markets to fulfill goals and actually achieve an economy that's more inclusive and sustainable.
Is it right for the government of the day, as the Wynne government did, as the Ford government is doing, to set the rules of the game in which they are clearly about to participate? What do you say?
Yeah, no, I mean, the CCLA opposed the Kathleen Wynne bill and the limits put in there, and we said that before the legislative committee. We were ready to challenge that law as an intervener when it was going to the court, and then we ended up intervening on the matter that was heard by Justice Morgan. Parliament never gets the last word, but it gets the word, and it is going to be controlled by the majority. Yes, it does seem unfair, and it could lead to things like gerrymandering, which is why ideally what would happen is that we do with spending limits what we do with the actual constituency boundaries, which is we create a third-party mechanism, such as having Elections Ontario, an independent body, hear from all the parties as to why we ought to have a limit at whatever it is, 100, 1,000, 100,000, a million, and then you get an independent say It's similar to what Duff is arguing for. It's just a little bit more like the CRTC and setting prices around what you can charge people. It would be a similar idea, but even then you would put that into place and then that could be overturned. So some of this is, in fact, democratic. The question is whether or not it's constitutional and whether or not a government can do this to its benefit. The problem being that under the Charter of Rights, the democratic rights under sections 3 to 5 cannot be subject to the notwithstanding clause, along with, for example, the mobility rights. And the idea was that the framers of the Constitution said, look, there should be some things that are off limits for parliaments to overturn courts. And I would say that this falls into that category, but it's not self-evident because those sections were not pled in the case. But I think that would be the argument for it, and that would mean that governments have to comply with the Charter of Rights and not get the last word. Why? Because that's what our Constitution says, and you would need a constitutional amendment to change that.
Well, Michael, you've mentioned the framers of the Constitution, and I happen to be sitting in a studio right now named after one of them. I'm in the William G. Davis studio at TVO, which was created by Bill Davis when he was education minister. And I can't help but remember that in the middle 1970s, when this issue came up, he appointed a committee of conservatives, liberals, and New Democrats, and then gave the job, I believe, of overseeing election expenses to the former head of the New Democratic Party, Donald MacDonald, to deal with this. It was an all-party solution to a situation where all parties were affected. And Jason, I guess I'm going to put this question to you. That seemed like a pretty good idea 45 years ago. Why isn't it today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've got a lot of sympathy for that, and the points that Michael's making in terms of some sort of not the CRTC, Michael. The CRTC doesn't have the best
fair.
Something like this, the CRTC, where you get a group of sort of wise people who get together and do it in a nonpartisan way. But I think, Steve, it's a reasonable question. But the question really is, do we want more money in politics? Like that's actually what this is trying to do. So there are, like Michael's arguing, civil liberties. Duff's are arguing something slightly different. The Teachers Federation, God bless them. I understand why you're arguing. You want to run a lot of ads in the upcoming ads. Groups like Ontario Proud and Doug Ford. I don't think it's self-evident, by the way, that this advantaged Doug Ford. There's a lot of right-wing groups like Jenny and I could have run an arms race here and got a bunch of people to donate millions of dollars and run pro-Doug Ford ads as well. That's off the table as well. There's a maximum there as well. Ontario Proud spent a lot of money. I think they were the top spender in the last election campaign in 2018. They're going to be sort of hamstrung and hobbled down to $600,000. So, Steve, I think your idea is actually, it's a great question on why you don't do that. But the fundamental question is, do we want more money or less? Do we want this kind of arms race? Do we want more attack ads? And I grew up in Southern Ontario. All I got, no cable. All I got was Buffalo, Detroit over the airwaves. In election season, all it is attack ads on sheriff, on governor, on whatever. And do we want more of that or don't we? And that's really the fundamental question that we're looking at here.
I'd like to get Karen to speak to that because, in fact, the government House Leader, Paul Calandra, in recalling the legislature, it's he who is responsible for doing that, said that the new legislation is intended to protect the individual rights of Ontario voters and protect our elections from American-style super PACs and their big money political influence. That's what they say is at the heart of this, Karen. Do you have reason to dispute that?
That's ridiculous. Super PACs, no. The power of super people in Ontario coming together to hold this government accountable is more like it. This is absolutely nothing like American-style politics. There were limits in place. I'm not arguing that there shouldn't be limits. Limits were in place, but for a government to arbitrarily just change those limits, to restrict voice, to restrict the amount of dialogue that we can engage with our members, the amount of issues that we can hold this government accountable for over that time, over a year of dialogue, of engaging in robust conversation. This is what it's about. It's about, in essence, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, freedom of speech and freedom of expression. This is not a democratic crisis for this government to come in and to impose the notwithstanding clause. This is really to stifle the voice of Ontarians, to restrict really legitimate criticism about the track record of this government.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.